Hey everyone, how's it going? As you look down my Twitch stream vortex here, just want to say hello to everyone. How's it going? Hope everyone's keeping well, enjoying themselves through this first bit of the self quarantine situation. Basically, what's going to be happening here going forward is I'm going to be laying out some online learning for you guys, just some stuff that we do in class typically that you can spend some time on. Don't want to overwhelm you, but we're still going to get through some content so we prepare you for next year. You can think about some things and learn some stuff while we're at it too. So there's an unknown timeline at this point going back to school, so we're not sure how long this will last. So I'm going to try and keep this up to the best of our ability. Um, Basically using the same online learning platforms we already do use. CNN 10 being a great resource for your daily news for you guys. We're going to use our Thompson's World blog to comment on a couple different things, post some homework there, as well as Google Classroom for, first of all, these videos and your slideshows and any accompanying work that needs to be completed um, with those. All right. So, like I said, we'll kind of run through the chapters here, and hopefully we can stay on top of this going forward. The first one we're going to be looking at is Chapter 6, Cultural Contact in North America. All right, so just making sure that this is working. It's my first test, so let's go. Okay, so Cultural Contact in North America, Chapter 6. This chapter we'll be looking at when Europe first made it over onto our continent, started looking at colonizing people, how they ultimately worked with the indigenous populations, the Aboriginals that were around, Canada at that time. So we kind of take a look at my screen here. I got a couple examples up on the board. First, took about top left there, your slave trade coming from Africa again. That's colonialism in real time. Uh, Ultimately, thinking that you as a European are superior to where you could even use humans as a tool, such as slavery. Down below you look, and it's more of an Aboriginal perspective, maybe what we'll be talking about a little bit today. Your Beothuk people, interacting and trading with those Europeans at the beginning. And, because we're home for a week, couple weeks at minimum, I would say, if you're looking for a good Netflix series to watch, here's another example of cultural contact, Freaks and Geeks, right? Great series from like the 80s. As you can see, James Franco, Jason Segel, Seth Rogen, a couple guys, other actors you may recognize or not, but it's made in the 90s. Great, great series. And, if I'm framing it in this kind of cultural context, you're having kind of your freaks. So I guess a crowd of high schoolers interacting with your geeks. Two of them are related, and it's just a really good example of kind of hybridization or media taking something like that and having two different cultures of people interact. So think about that even as you go to school, right? You have athletic students and you have students that love to play video games every day. That's two cultures of people that are ultimately coming together and interacting. Okay? So your objectives. So again, I always like to run through what the curriculum is telling me you need to know for this chapter, right? And so for this second unit, we just finished our first unit. All your marks are posted up online. So 2.1, recognize and appreciate historical and contemporary consequences of European contact, historical globalization, imperialism on Aboriginal societies. Okay, so again, just understanding the first time that these different cultures came together, history, right? Imperialism being this idea of your Europeans trying to kind of take over and instill their values and what's going on Aboriginal societies. So we're going to look at the Beothuk people in Newfoundland, which is one of our first examples of cultural contact here in Canada. Okay, so 2.5, recognize and appreciate various perspectives regarding the prevalence and impacts of Eurocentrism. So again, Eurocentrism being we are the best, right? We need to civilize the world. We need to go and we need to save the savages, save the people from themselves, ultimately. Okay, and then your last one, 2.6, and examine impacts of cultural contact between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, exchange of goods and technologies, depopulation, influences on government and social institutions. Okay, so we'll be looking a little bit historically. Again, you look at something like Freaks and Geeks, that's a modern day example, right? Even you being at school and having someone move from a different country, right? You start hanging out with them, you're exposed to their food, their language, the different things that make them unique. So again, just having two cultures come together and affect one another. All right, so let's talk about these guys right here. These are the Beothuks. They call them a lost people because they were a culture that did come into contact with Europeans. They were eventually genocide took place with that culture. So because of their difference, because of that culture not basically working, things went awry, and they ended up all getting killed by the end of the day. Okay, so original people of Newfoundland, you had speakers, hunter-gatherer, populace is what they called them. Um, One of our first examples of the winners really writing history, right? So you think of wars and different scenarios that go on, and the winners always end up writing history. So this situation makes a lot of sense because this kind of set the tone for what people thought Aboriginals were across the ocean back in Europe at the time. Because again, what the winners were saying was they were savages. This was all necessary when, what history is kind of stated now is that definitely wasn't the deal. Okay, so this is actually where the red Indian originated. So if you see down there on the right, you can see our red man. So they used to use a flower called red ochre actually, and they'd rub it on themselves before war. And if you think of the red man or red men or all these different kind of terminology that you use to equate to Aboriginals, this is your kind of first example of that red man. So that's actually where that terminology gets started. Okay, so the Beothuk. So before the Europeans arrived in North America, hundreds of indigenous people lived on the continent, right? They called it Turtle Island. And they say for thousands of years they had cultures and they had civilizations that, existed and, co-functioned between other tribes, and there was trading, and, it was a legitimate society before, your Europeans came and said, listen, we're going to create a society. It was already a society at the time. So European fishing fleet discovered the abundant fish stocks in the Atlantic Ocean and began to explore, finding different places to trade, culture contact. So ultimately, that right there led for them to keep pushing to the ocean until they eventually came all the way across and seeing where we were. Okay? So cultural contact had economic, social, political impact on the people involved, just like globalization, just like everything we deal with today, right? From trade to different cultures getting together, to the politics and how you run your individual community, your tribe, just interacting and, sometimes not working to your benefit. Okay, so what ways can it affect people? So for these people specifically, we had conflict, right? When the Europeans came and they said, we're gonna run things like we run them, the Aboriginals ultimately said no, right? So it created a conflict to where you had wars, you had violence. Okay, they also say the Europeans brought disease with them, right? So very impoverished kind of nations in Europe had all kinds of different ailments that, again, was said that they brought those over to our people, right? So loss of resources, having to share those resources, culturally exchanging your goods, your knowledge, your information, and then ultimately assimilating, right? Assimilation can lead to the loss of your culture, saying, hey, we want you to be just like us. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the Beothuk people and discuss what effect cultural contact can lead, and what it can lead to, and specifically with these people, how did it lead to their extinction? Okay, so if you take a look at this map right here, this is Newfoundland and Labrador. Okay, so you can see the Beothuk occupation of Newfoundland. So right down there is where a lot of those kind of cultural sites are still today, where their tribes were, where they could still access the water as well as the land to feed themselves, to hunt, to gather, right? And so this is just ultimately where that took point. If you're from Newfoundland, you're familiar with this island at all, you can probably still see, these things are called different things now, but this is what they are originally known as to our Beothuk people, okay? So who were they? Okay, first people said Newfoundland came to be known as the Red Indians because they would paint their bodies, faces, hair, clothing, possessions, and tools using red paint. They made of powdered ochre mixed with either fish oil or animal grease. First contact with the Europeans came in the late 1400s. Some Beothuk were captured by the early European missions. They were taken to countries like Portugal and rumored to be the first natives paraded around Europe as exotic cultures from the New World. Okay, most died during the trip to Europe or not long after arrival. And so, yeah, that's your first example of what your Europeans did with those people. They take them, they bring them to a circus, say, hey, if you travel across the ocean to the New World, this is what you can expect, people that look like this. Okay. So put in the context, here's a quote from an Italian diplomat. His name was Alberto Cantino. Okay, so they appear to be savages, yet they are gentle and have a strong sense of shame, and are better made in the arms, legs, and shoulders than it is possible to describe. Admirably fitted to endure labor, and will probably turn out to be the best slaves that have ever been discovered up until this time. Okay, so you ask yourself, what does this quote say that the European attitudes toward the people? What does this quote say about the European attitudes towards the people they encountered? Okay, so this is when terminology like ethnocentrism, where that ethnic population thought that they were the best, they thought they were civilized, they thought that what they could do going forward, would never be touched, and it was just purely positive what they were doing out in the world. They were saving the world, right? They were civilizing the world, and everybody hop on board. Okay, so you just think of the way in which even something like that quote could be used as a source analysis, could be used as something that you have to go and further explain, right? Think of that perspective coming from your your populace, okay? So another famous image here, right? Yue Zhongyi, his encounter with the Beotucs in 1612 in Trinity Bay. Again, this is when things were pretty amicable. They were trading back and forth, right? Soon times, though, we began to have the conflict as politics and economics started to kind of mix, all right? So Europeans began to harvest the large quantities of fish off the coast of Newfoundland, which the Beothuk people depended on, all right? So Europeans set up fishing villages along the coast, which blocked the Beothuk from accessing the ocean, all right? So again, putting their interests above your Aboriginal people, right? And they were the first people there. These were their fishing lines. They had these, kind of setups going for thousands of years to where, they had their secret spots. I know as a fisherman myself, I know places that I can go fishing that I'm going to catch fish, right? So you now had Europeans saying, well, you can't go and get your fish there. Yeah, but it's a source of food, right? So you're not just affecting your life in a way as a guest in your home saying, no, you can't do something like that, okay? So the Aztecs were forced to move inland and find another source of food. The Europeans started to move inland to expand their fur trade now. The Beothuk did not want to participate in the fur trade. Okay, so they began to compete with the Beothuk for furs and food, and cultural contact ultimately, equated to conflict, and they started to kill each other. Sorry. Okay, wars over land, wars over, again, the politics, the economics, the trade wasn't working out anymore, and the Europeans had very sophisticated ways of doing battle, and they started to decimate that population of people, okay, until there were very few people left, and the opposition, as the population got smaller, there was less that they could do to protect their land, right, and ultimately the colonization of that place led to them spreading across Canada, right, so this is kind of your first example of that taking place. So here you have an example of how the Beothuk people would store their food, okay, so you see there's lots of dry meat, lots of fish, game that they would hunt, right? And this was a sophisticated culture of people. This image here was created back, a long time ago at this point. So again, these weren't just these savages that needed correction. They were a very sophisticated culture of people. Okay, they used a variety of different resources from their environment for clothing, food, and tools. So for example, blades for harpoons made from bones. They preserve meat by drying or smoking that meat in a smoking house. They consumed a variety of foods based on natural resources. So for example, right, caribou fat turns into grease and seal blubber turned into oil, right? So really understanding how to use the land to your benefit. Again, indigenous populations, first one there, the cultural contact was almost forced upon them, right? And look what took place. So again, some more examples here. Some water buckets over there on your right. That's how they used to collect their water, right? So different runoff systems and different eavesdrop systems on some of their smoking houses. So you can see down here, smoking or drying house for your venison. Venison is deer meat. And let's see that nice buck there. I love bucks. He looks delicious, actually. Before they dry their meat, right, for storing, it'll last a little bit longer. You can see at the top what they were hunting with. These are deer spears, right? So just imagine the way in which they would have to hunt their animals, not so easy with a gun from a couple hundred yards or meters away. You now have a stick with a pointy end on the back, so imagine how difficult that would be to hunt those things. They were very good at it. That's how they lived. Okay, so let's keep going on here. So cultural contact. The Beothuk tried to scare away the Europeans by stealing and destroying their equipment. The Europeans began hunting the Beothuk and killing them. The Beothuk that were not murdered were dying of starvation and European diseases. Okay, So in 1769, a royal proclamation was issued that said it was a capital crime to murder any Beothuk. It is His Majesty's King George III royal will and pleasure that I do strictly enjoin and require all His Majesty's subjects to live in anonymity and brotherly kindness with the native savages, Beothuk, of the said island of Newfoundland. Okay? However, the killings continue despite the chance of being tried either in Newfoundland or England. Okay, and why is that? Well, again, you can see just in the rhetoric there, they still considered them savages, right? And the conflicts that were created with this cultural interaction were still there. They weren't solved. Okay, again, the white man still thinking that they were prevalent, right? Still thinking that they were on top or somehow in charge of that situation. And again, just that racism, that ethnocentrism just led to them, their violence continued until the population was absolutely decimated. Okay? The last of the Beothuk, so by early 19th century, the 1800s, there was only a small refugee Beothuk population left in Newfoundland. So by 1829, the last known Beothuk died, and the group became extinct. Okay? The Beothuk people can no longer speak for themselves, and little is known about them since they tried to avoid European contact. Swanadikit is said to have been the last Beothuk. That's her on the side right there. She died of tuberculosis in 1829 in St. John's, Newfoundland. She drew illustrations to record and preserve the Beothuk history and culture. Okay, so again, the victors write the history, right? Or the winners write history. Again, that concept that they had ultimately silenced that population of people down to a point where you had almost one person. Okay, that was able to conduct what took place there, what their history was, what their culture was, right? And there's very little in our history books about them specifically because that's the way in which we treated those indigenous populations at the time, right? We were better. Our way is the best. We're going to civilize you. Your history is not so much important. And if there were things that contradicted that worldview, we certainly wouldn't want that to be kind of exposed or related to the public. Okay, so it's kind of interesting here. Called her the Dancing Woman. This is her obituary, September 14th, 1829. So died at St. John's, Newfoundland on the 6th of June, last in the 29th year of her age, Shanadiwidi. Okay, supposed to be the last of the Red Indians or Beothuk. This is interesting. Female lived 6 years as a captive amongst the English, and when taken notice of, latterly exhibited extraordinary mental talents. This tribe, the Aborigines of Newfoundland, presents an anomaly in the history of man. Expecting a few families of them soon after the discovery of America, they never held intercourse with the Europeans, by whom they have ever since been surrounded, nor with the other tribes of Indians, since the introduction of firearms amongst them. There has been a primitive nation, once claiming rank as a portion of the human race, who have lived, flourished, and become extinct in their own orbit. They have been dislodged and disappeared from the earth in their native independence in 1829. So in a primitive of condition as they were before the discovery of the New World, and that too on the nearest point of America, England, and one of our oldest and most important colonies. Okay, so ultimately saying that, if you pick a few different things from that exit out, is that she was crazy intelligent, right? And they did not expect for that population of people to have people within there that did have those extraordinary mental talents or had the same, intellectual capability as the rest of us. Okay, you can see there that they didn't breed with other people. The Beothuk stayed within the Beothuks. And once they got into that kind of war or that conflict and they were wiped out, that was it, right? Because they never really went outside of their orbit, as things like this started to take place, it killed that population and got rid of them. Okay? And then right at the beginning of colonization to where there wasn't accountability in place, there wasn't law in place that went to protect these different people. Okay? So at this point in the video, okay, you can stop, right? It's been 19 minutes of me talking, okay, a little less than class, so that works. So what I'd like you to do now is go into your Google Classroom, you can pause this video, and you can work on your Chapter 6 questions that I'm going to post there. Okay, so those questions will kind of accompany the entire chapter. It'll, assist you with understanding what's going on here, give you a little bit more background information on the Beothuks and what this cultural contact is all about. Okay, so hit pause, and I'm going to move on here. At this point, see it for you for your day, for 2 days, whatever's going to work at your own pace, and you can work on the Chapter 6 questions posted to the Google Classroom. Okay. So for the second half of this, okay, so not a ton of stuff today. We're just going to look at some terminology that's really important. If you have a term dictionary, you're taking some notes, these are These are the types of terminology that you'll see in social studies for the next few years moving forward as they really do focus on, colonization and really just world history. A lot of the reasons and issues that we're still having today can stem from this stuff. So please make your way to the appropriate whiteboard where you'll find the finals following. That's what we have done in class. So just for your benefit, you can kind of record these terms, make sure you know what they mean. Okay. So there's your cultural contact right there. On your right, you have your Europeans interacting with your Aboriginal folks. On the left here is colonialism, right? It's a visual representation of what colonialism is. So that's Mother England, the mother country, reaching out, and those long arms of globalization, colonialism, to go around and to affect all these different places and all these different colonies that had indigenous populations that, again, they were trying to save or fix. So make sure you have those terms down for you. You can pause this video. You should be able to just press play in your slideshow. If you have that slideshow open with you, you can watch this history summarize the Iroquois and Native Americans. Again, another example of this cultural contact. So this is the Six Nations Confederacy. So the six Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois nations, form the Six Nations Confederacy. The nations formed a democracy based on an unwritten constitution, the Great Law of Peace. Okay, this ensured that all people, including women, participated equally in government. To guarantee certain rights and freedoms, speech, freedom, or religion, at the time of contact with the indigenous people. The Europeans knew very little about democracy, everything and everyone equal. So through the interaction with the Six Nations, the Europeans' ideas evolved. For all the talk of savagery, right, and this lower, level of people, believe it or not, a lot of these things in which, make our democracy function were taken from history, okay, and were taken from your First Nations people that they first came into contact, okay. So the Six Nations Confederacy, take a look at this video, okay, hit pause, open the video up, watch it on YouTube, so you have this in your brain, okay. So again, cultural contact in North America, moving on, the extinction of cultural groups. So, for example, the Beothuk were eradicated from North America, Aboriginals losing their freedom and movement and being placed on reserves, the loss of the potlatch traditions of the Aboriginals in Canada. It had a positive effect, and was the tools that the First Nations acquired from the Europeans, right? It did help them advance their culture in certain ways, advance their society. They were to build more effectively. They started building houses and homes and those types of things. And the Europeans learned of democracy and that all people from the Six Nations Confederacy are equal, right? And that was that idea that equality was taking place. That's how the native populations were rolling, not necessarily how your Europeans were doing things at that time, okay? So just for your information, that's another example that you'd probably see on a unit test. You'd probably see on a PAT, just as they like to talk about Sudan as another example of cultural contact. This is a really good explanation of that conflict that goes back, years and years. So again, when you get a second, take a look at the video, watch it, just understand what's going on there with Sudan, and I'll give you a quick breakdown here going forward. Okay, so civil wars in Sudan reflect the consequences of the past cultural contacts. So Britain colonized and ruled by Sudan in 1881. In 1899, Britain and Egypt agreed to rule Sudan together. So the 1920s came, they had a closed-door policy, created where the people and cultures in north and south of Sudan were separated. North was populated by the people of Arab descent, and the south was populated by the people of African origin. So 1956 came, and Sudan gained independence, and a closed-door policy was abandoned. Power of country handed over to the northern Arabs who imposed Islamic rule. Policies led to cultural, racial, and religious tensions between the north and the south. Civil war erupted and led to a mass displacement of the southern people, which continues to today. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about that. Something that you can take a second, Google, see what's going on, because again, it's still happening today, right? You think of these still mass displacements of populations going on right now, like, as this global pandemic is starting to sweep the world, you still have people that are not at home, they're displaced, right? And what's going to happen to those people? Again, something you can think about, but give that a chance, okay? Give that video a shot. Sudan's history of civil wars and conflict, for you to check out there and explain a little bit more into detail. Okay, so now the last thing I'm going to ask you to do is, if you go into your Google Classroom, I've posted a diamond activity. You can make your own copy of it in a textbook. You could print your own if you'd like to, and you could wrap that up. And that's going to be it for Chapter 6, guys. Thanks for listening to me speak for 25 minutes. I need a drink of water now. Make sure that you're all, taking it easy and taking some time for yourself. I love that Freaks and Geeks television show. If you're bored, give it a shot, give it a watch, and hope you guys are doing good. And we'll hear from you, or we'll talk to you guys later. Thanks.